I am constantly in awe of my parents' strength when I hear about their upbringing. My father, raised in Sidi Bouzid, Tunisia, shared a small room with his 5 brothers and sisters. My mom, raised in the Mellah, or the Jewish ghetto of Rabat, Morocco, where her family shared the one oven that resided in the middle of their village. Both of my parents were born and raised in countries where Jews were set apart and had to tend to themselves. Sure, years later, our family shared incredible stories, like Uncle James reminiscing that the Mellah brought him a lamb as a pet every winter, but by the month of Nisan, that lamb was being served for the first night of Seder. But their overall experiences weren't easy. Jews lived very modest lives as minorities in these countries. They were strangers in a strange land. But their journeys of being strangers didn't end there. Years later, they became strangers again as Sephardic Jews who made Aliyah to Israel in the 1950s. Then, strangers one more time when moving to America in the 1980s. Acclimating repeatedly has been a part of their personal journey. But their motivation was clear. My parents had been newcomers time and time again for the betterment of their children's lives, making countless sacrifices to ensure that my sisters and I would have access to higher education, religious freedom, and opportunities my parents didn't have growing up. The text I'm about to explore with you speaks directly to my family as strangers in search for a better life. In this week's Parsha, Parshat Mishpatim, we come across one of the Torah's most recognizable assertions. Our text shows us that we should always be concerned with the oppressed because we were once downtrodden outsiders ourselves. Exodus 23:9 states, "Ger lo tilchatz, ve'atem yadatem et nefesh hager, ki gerim haytem be'eretz Mitzrayim." You shall not oppress the stranger, for you can comprehend the stranger's soul, because you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. As Jews, we are keenly aware of the pain that oppressed people face in difficult times, because we were strangers, outsiders in Egypt. This is a familiar trope in our sacred scriptures. Our exceptional ability to empathize with the downtrodden comes from our having been a stranger so many times over the course of our history in the diaspora. Being a ger is a part of our Jewish identity. In the Talmud, the rabbis tell us that Exodus 23:9 is one of 36 places where the Torah tells us to be kind to the ger, the stranger. This idea is so central to our ethical tradition that we see it repeated in our Torah over and over again. Each example is reiterated in a different context to show us how many different complexities the stranger endures. According to Rashi, the stranger is someone who was born in one land and migrates into another country to reside there. In this way, the ger is neither an Ezrach, a native Israelite, nor a Norchi, a foreigner. The ger is an in-between person. The Bible contains conflicting instructions as to whether the ger's place is in Israelite society, and other instances wherein the Torah seems to assert that a ger can never attain regularized status as a full member of the native community. Yet in other places, it seems as though the ger's status may be regularized. According to HUC professor Dr. David Sperling, if the ger could attain regularized status, then this would be the earliest manifestation of a naturalization process in Jewish history. Today, Americans are preoccupied in a heated debate about the status of the modern-day gerim, those whom, as Rashi taught us, were not born in the United States, but have migrated or are trying to migrate to America. And yet, even though we know how much these people struggle to create a symbol of normalcy in their lives, having compassion for the stranger is not as easy as it sounds. It is challenging for people to identify with the problems of others in different circumstances than their own. To some, differences in culture, identity, language, and religion are a threat to their current way of life. The tension between having compassion for the stranger while simultaneously wanting to protect one's way of life from any outside threat leads to a complicated view of the outsider. This complexity is demonstrated in this very parsha. Though Exodus 23:9 says we cannot oppress the stranger, Exodus 23:31 reads, "Vesheti et gvulatcha, miyam suf ve'ad yam plishtim, וממדבר עד הנהר, כי אתן בידכם את יושבי הארץ, וגרשתם מפניך." I will set your borders from the Sea of Reeds to the Sea of Philistia, and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants of your land into your hands, and I will drive them out before you. These two psukim feel like they are at odds with each other. How can we, on the one hand, treat the stranger with compassion, while on the other continue to have enemies whom we want to destroy? I suggest that we reimagine the enemy as a stranger. We must do the work that allows us to have a different type of relationship so our enemies cease to be enemies and become people for whom we have compassion. Because Jews so intimately understand what it means to be stranger in a strange land, we are compelled to be compassionate to all those going through that experience. Transforming the other from enemy to stranger allows us to see the humanity in all people and treat them with dignity. However, this biblical text does not only instruct us to feel and identify with the stranger, but also urges us to take action in uplifting these individuals. Exodus 23:5 states, "When you see the donkey of your enemy lying on its load, you shall refrain from leaving him with it, and you must nevertheless help raise it." Here, we are pushed to take our feelings of compassion and empathy and turn them into action. It isn't enough to feel sorry for someone in trouble. We must find ways in which to help those persons, even if we don't like them. Furthermore, the Torah's word usage is really intriguing here. Exodus 23:5 discusses the burden of your enemy. The text could have easily read, "When you see the donkey of a stranger or a distant acquaintance." Rather, the Torah specifies that it is the enemy that you must help. So it seems that within this Torah portion, we are pushed to not only empathize and help the stranger, but also the enemy. Our feelings of compassion and empathy for every person, the stranger and enemy alike, should compel us to go beyond our personal experience and take action. There are many ways in which we can do our part to help. Congressman Will Hurd from Texas shows us his approach to compassion. Congressman Hurd is the only Republican member of the House who voted against the southern border wall with Mexico. Moreover, his district represents half of the entire U.S. southern border. That's 800,000 constituents. In his interview with Michael Barbaro of the New York Times Daily podcast, Congressman Hurd believes that Americans need to shift the conversation regarding the humanitarian needs of those attempting to enter the U.S. He argues that we need to think of those as individuals as people who are in need of help and not as enemies. A lot of adjectives have been used to discuss this issue, he says. We need to define what the problem actually is and create the tools we should be using to stop it. That's where the focus should be. Think about it this way. If you are a parent and you think the only way for your child to have a future is to do this perilous trek to the US, you would do it. He continues, "We don't talk enough about how we address the root causes that is causing illegal immigration. which is violence and lack of economic opportunity. It is best when we talk about the real problems, because then we can focus on the real solution. Congressman Hurd changes the way strangers are viewed, not as enemies, but as individuals who we can help. This is someone who identifies with those seeking refuge and his largely Latino constituency, not because he identifies ethnically with these groups, but rather because he has compassion for the stranger. He doesn't see those on the other side of the border as enemies, but as people in need of aid. He's doing this because he understands there's a real issue with the Mexican-American relationship, and the people on the other side are in need of compassion. As an American congressman, he uses his influence in the government to change the conversation regarding this issue, doing his best to inspire other members of Congress to think like him. What he does is not easy. He receives a lot of pushback for his way of thinking, especially from those who are in his own party. It is simpler to disregard problems that are not our own and assume someone else will deal with them. This is especially true if we are inconvenienced or think this will take us away from dealing with our own issues first. Despite the challenges that make these actions difficult, we Jews should feel compelled to do our part in lifting the burden. In today's fast-paced world, we can locate so many opportunities to find commonalities with those who seem to be the stranger. We hear stories about racism, anti-Semitism, and other harmful rhetoric of hatred. In these adversities, it is our duty to seek compassion for those who need it, melt away the distractions, and focus our efforts on the tasks that create justice. There are a myriad of hardworking organizations and group of individuals that are also looking to be a part of a movement that takes initiative for positive change, such as the RAC Ohio, the Commission on Social Action, and so many others. These organizations are one way of participating in social action. If these organizations don't speak to you, contact your local legislators or congresspeople regarding issues that speak to your heart. These are just a few ways to get involved, and there are so many more. When asked where I'm from, some of you have heard me say, I'm from the Northeast via Ashdod. For those of us who know how geography works, that might sound like a silly answer, but it is accurate. Having been born to immigrant parents in Westport, Connecticut, and growing up in Ashdod, I've experienced the feeling of stranger in most of the places I've lived. Some of the challenges I experienced helped shape the person I've become today, but those challenges pale in comparison to those fleeing the threats of poverty and death. So when I hear stories about families being separated at the border or refugees being threatened to be sent back to their country of origin where their lives might be threatened, I grow very concerned. Constantly feeling like an outsider can be a really terrifying experience that should not be disregarded. People are in need of real aid, and it is our obligation to help them. I hope to create and live in a community that is inclusive, involved, and takes action when there is injustice. Living in the United States comes with great privileges, but also great responsibility. Creating justice is not only our job as Jews, but an investment in the well-being of our future world for the next generation. Shabbat Shalom.